In this conversation, Steve and I talk about how to develop emotionally intelligent leaders that build a high performing culture within your teams. If you're the owner of a small business or if you lead a team within your company, then this video is just for you. So make sure you watch all the way to the end. But if you know exactly what you're here for, I've got timestamps down below, so make sure to skip to the points that you find most interesting. If you're new to this channel, then hi, my name's Ash. I'm a leadership consultant and I help you develop leadership skills fit for the modern day. So if that's for you, then consider subscribing to this channel. Without further ado, let's talk about how to build high-performing teams.
I'm very happy you can join us. I've been looking forward to this conversation since we booked it about a month ago. I've got my notes. I'm ready to go. Introduce yourself, background, who you are, how you got here.
Thanks for having me on. I think this is great, Steve. This is going to be a great conversation, so I'm really excited. So my name's Ash. My background is in management consulting. I eventually quit that Big Four and started my own firm, and I'm focusing more on just the people side of things and developing high-performing teams and leaders instead of just having managers on board. I think that's the area that I felt strongly about, and when I was in management consulting, I did a lot of work in that area as well. So working with different kinds of people, working with different kinds of companies. We've even started kind of dabbling with some universities now, so it's quite an interesting area to kind of start touching on. So yeah, really looking forward to this conversation.
You told me that you were starting to get some work, or you were working with some schools, and I've got a panel coming up on Sunday with with Concordia University on. It's their business school, HR and Management Association that's holding a conference, and it's so good to see the future, right? These are the leaders of tomorrow, and I know that's what drives me, is to influence the future of management in terms of leaders. I grew up in a time when managers were really about the things that got done. They weren't about the people. And we still do see a lot of that, hence me being an independent. It was the passion that drove me to it. What drove you to do this? What was your why?
So for me, it was kind of a weird one because, like I said, I was already enjoying my consulting life. So it wasn't like, a lot of people start their own business because they really don't like consulting or they don't like whatever job they were doing before. But for me, I didn't really have that sort of, I hate this. I want to get out of the rat race type thing. Like I was happy doing what I was doing. I was really good at it. But I think during lockdown, I had a moment of realization, like, where are my strengths? What are the things that I could be doing? And I just, it came to me when there was time we were kind of sitting around and I analyzed the actual workload I was doing. And I could really condense a lot of work I was doing to like 2-3 hours a day and still be seen as one of the highest performers within the team. And I was like,
Yes.
Something doesn't really make sense here. Like, how can this be the case? And then at the same time, I'm speaking to other people and they are struggling with just keeping up with the workload. Not because they had more work than me or something like that. It's just that, how you manage your time, how do you have a relationship with your leaders, managers, stuff like that. And that drew me to seeing what else I could do. So when I first started, it was actually individuals. So we were just helping one-on-one to help individuals to optimize their time, optimize their communication skills and stuff like that, to see how they could position themselves a bit more strongly within their own situation they're in. I realized that I found something that other people may have already found or overlooked or something like that that didn't really click, and it was that using our communication skills and self-leadership for our workplace so we could actually get what we want while helping our workplaces win at the same time.
The reason why I find it interesting is kind of the same thing. I was working and I was seeing that, I felt as if I didn't show up for 4 days of the week, I could still get so much more done than a lot of the other people around me. And to your point, I didn't point the fingers at them and saying, these are bad people I really looked at it as a leadership issue. And to your point, like the structure, and not just that, to me was more about critical path. People were working on things that didn't really matter. It was the business of busyness, right? So for them, they were getting so much done, and a lot of them were frantic, and they felt like, there's so much to do and I'm always behind. But it was because they weren't dealing in the important things, but they didn't have the leadership to guide them towards those things. And as I spoke with more and more people, I started hearing that was something that happened in a lot of organizations. And so that's when I realized, this is something that people need help on, and organizations need help on, because if there's all these people who are working on urgent or unimportant, non-critical path items, then that means the organization's probably not achieving its objectives. So that's really interesting. I agree with you also that, you know, joining or doing consulting because you hated something, you know, any negative goal, well, that's fine, and that might motivate you for a short while, but that's not going to keep you going in the long run, right? You've got to love what you do, and that's what's got to drive you more than I hate that. All right, let's get into high performance culture. What do you see? What do you think? Like you're out there, you're working with organizations. You've done it both when you were a consultant, working for an organization, and now you're doing it on your own. What are you seeing, and what do you think impedes organizations from attaining high performance in their culture?
You know, the interesting thing was like, what do we define as a high performance culture? Like, so when I was speaking to some people at the beginning, that's something that stood out, because what I thought was high performance was not necessarily what somebody else might think is high performance. So the first thing is kind of, how do you establish what that lands at? I think when there's a sales-driven organization, for example, high performance for them is when they're hitting their numbers and their KPIs are being met. But when you're training a team that's not necessarily sales focused, now high performance can be measured inside different ways. But for me, it's always been around how can you get more things done in a shorter amount of time, but also not burn out in the process of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when many teams try to arrange it, you see, like, there's also e-learning stuff around high performance, right? So you can kind of really go in deep on trying to just do that. So when organizations try to just go down that route, the things you see is, okay, well, here's the prioritization matrix, here's the 80-20 principle, like here's all these things that you can kind of introduce into your model, and then slap it on with an ADA model on top to be like, cool, this is how you're going to run it, and then here's how tactically you're going to break it out. You roll that out to the team and hope that, you know, if you're running on an agile format, then you're kind of measuring your completion rate of tasks. If you're not doing that, then you're kind of finishing your overall project management to see where you're doing. So performance then is only measured between how many tasks are started and how many tasks are finished in any given time. But a culture, in my opinion at least, goes beyond that. It's how do people think, how do people feel, and do people want to do that? Mm-hmm. So when it's just like a number of this is how many versus this is how many at the end, I feel like that doesn't really involve any kind of cultural aspect to it. So if we can add the people element to that, okay, if you want to not have people burning out, and, you know, high performers, as you probably know, is like have a tendency of go, and then just like collapse without knowing and no indication. So yeah, that's kind of the big barrier to differentiation that I see in it. I know you have lots of opinions on this as well, so I'll let you talk before I just ramble on.
No. I mean, I'm listening to you, and I'm just nodding because the way I see it is, and I wrote this down in my notes. The first part you're talking about, the goals and the actions that are going to get you there, and the measuring. That's all the what and the how. But how you get to that, how you get to the culture of it, is really in the why, and getting the people on board with the why. And the why is more than just, hey, the organization has decided this is the why. It's the why that the people who are in the organization identify with, and that drives them to. There's the analogy of holding a little weight, or the pebble in the shoe, and all these are analogies that show it's not this big thing that breaks people down, their mental health and the stress and the anxiety that comes with work and leads to burnout. It's little things. And I think that when we've got that why, and we identify, when we get up in the morning and say, I'm happy with what I'm doing, and not happy like I've got a smile, but I'm engaged, I'm challenged, and the weight can be heavier, but I'm excited and energized to lift that weight, versus the weight doesn't have to be so heavy, but I've got no energy or motivation to do it. And that, again, comes back to identify what I'm doing with something that's important to me. And so I agree with you that high performance is more than just the what's in the hows. There's a big part of the why, and that's when we get into the touchy-feely things, if you will. But we're dealing with people, right? And that's the differentiator between organizations. Technologies and equipment and all that can be copied over the mid to short term in most cases. But the real differentiator is the strength you have in your people, and getting them on board and getting them engaged, which we hear about a lot. So what do you think about, we're hearing a lot about a lack of engagement. Do you think, and if it's not, what do you think do you think the lack of engagement we're seeing in a lot of workplaces from a lot of employees is one of the big impediments to high performance cultures?
I think yes and no in terms of that, because there's two elements to that, right? So a culture is how, one of the things that fall under the culture bracket is how much you feel like you belong within a company. That goes on to kind of what you were talking about, where do you buy in with the vision and the mission that the company's on? So a lot of startups nowadays do that quite well, where they start with a mission-focused approach, especially the ones that are coming out for, sustainability or kind of environmental cleansing, that kind of stuff. They have a very, very clear mission as to why they want to do it, and they do a good job of hiring people who already have that mission. Like, regardless of what their technical skill set is, they would already have that mental attitude that they want to do something good. So now they automatically, at least in the beginning, feel like they belong in that firm because everybody thinks like that. Versus some other established firms already, they might hire for skills rather than for vision. So now it's like, okay, do you train your people on the vision or not? And that becomes a bit of a challenge. So that's the one side of the aspect. And I think the other side of aspect or culture becomes around like learning versus doing. So this is what I've recently come to realize as well. There's like a bunch of people who join just because they want to learn. And this is usually attributed to just juniors. But as we know, if you're a high performing individual, you will always want to be learning and growing. So you could be a director in a firm and you still want to feel like you're growing and you're learning new things. So, and that's just a high performing attribute to have. And so when people hire learners or high performers and then just give them the do, it becomes really hard to embed themselves into a culture because they feel like the culture is just a use you and lose you type deal. Just because they haven't got the learning potential in there. So it's like, how do you balance the belonging aspect to culture so you feel like you're bonding with the vision with the individual needs of whether you want to learn or whether you're happy to just do? And I think those two coming in with a mix will actually drive a really good performance balance, because obviously the vision side of things, every company should really have that, especially when you're hiring nowadays. Back in the day, you join a firm, you just don't leave. It's just not really the done thing, right? Whereas now, the power is really within the employees to say, well, I'm not happy here, I'm just going to jump out, especially if you have those key skills that are very, very well sought after. There's a big skill shortage in the UK. I'm sure, in the US and Canada and things, it's the same thing. But so if you think, okay, well, if the power is in the employees and we can't expect them to just stay, what would make them stay? And I think meeting the overall vision and mission as well as the individual drivers probably will give the answer to that.
Yeah, I think there's another factor that's playing in on that one. I just read a book and they talked about how in the old days you joined the company, like the point you made, you joined and you stayed. But you stayed because it was almost inevitable that a lot of companies just grew year over year. They would just grow. And so staying in your role allowed you to grow. But in today's environment, companies are not growing year over year because the economy is no longer growing to that extent, right? We're happy if we get a 2 or 3% growth. That's huge. Versus back in the days, you can see much stronger growth on a global scale. And so now, because of that, people are saying, I don't see myself growing for a long time. To your point, especially the high performers who are sitting there and saying, I want to grow. And if I'm not going to grow because my role is growing, because the company continues to grow, and exactly like you said, it has to be within the culture. It has to be within the leader's mindset that I have to give opportunity to grow, even if we as an organization aren't growing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's so key when you're talking to, the people who become managers. It's really interesting because that thing that you just said over there, like where the leaders feel like they want to establish that mindset as well. It's like, that's probably where we should draw the differentiator between like natural born leaders, not necessarily born, but like naturally leadership led versus people who have become into leadership positions. So it's like, we talk about this a lot. It's like, you become a manager because you're technically good at your job in the early days, right? Like that's how you get promoted, because you were good. And then it just so happens
And it was your
that
only opportunity for further growth, right? You're
exactly
at the top of your technical level. How do I continue to grow in my career? I'll become a manager.
exactly. It's like you either give them a raise or you have to promote them to the next level. If not, the person's leaving. If they're technically good, you want to keep them in the firm. So now this person who's technically excellent became a manager, and maybe in the beginning they can still balance the technical with the non-technical, but then over time, most of their job will be people management and no longer technical stuff. They'll almost act as subject matter experts when it comes to the technical side of things, and that's about it.
Yeah.
But like you said, I think you wrote an article the other day is about like how people don't have much training in leadership, and like 50% of companies globally show that they don't have any formal training in place for leaders or for managers to become leaders. So to expect them to understand the importance of something like a vision or a strategy that everybody unites under doesn't really make sense, because as a manager, you don't really care about all these things. Like you should just be like, oh, this is the productivity and the output that we're looking at. Here's how we measure our growth, not necessarily about how people feel and how engaged they are, bringing back to that original aspect.
You think that comes from a lack of understanding, though? Like, if the people, like you said, like, I'm not concerned about how they feel or whether or not they're engaged, but there seems to be a lot of ignorance there that, well, if they don't feel right, if they're not engaged, it's going to be a lot harder. I worked in a job once where I literally felt like I would just dig holes just to fill them back up. Like I would be given projects or tasks, and then for them only to be shelved constantly. And it was almost like let's just keep him busy by giving him and his team stuff. And so at some point there was just I'm tired of digging holes just to fill them back up. There was no feeling, there was no engagement. And so my performance wasn't going to be there. So do you think that managers who lack on the leadership side, do you think they lack that understanding? There's ignorance as to what it takes to get people to perform?
Yeah, I think it's maybe not as malicious as like intentional ignorance, but I think it's it probably inevitably happens that you become a manager because you are quite good at what you were doing, and so you want to keep focused on that. So I see a lot where people find it difficult to let go of their previous control. When they become a manager, they still want to be in the doing. Yeah. So there's a whole concept around like how do you go to just leading and being and enabling versus doing all the time. So there's probably a duality element of that. It's like one element of just not wanting to let go, and the other element of not having time.
Yeah.
Because they haven't let go of these things. That no, I don't have time to go and participate in these things or do this e-learning stuff because I don't know when I'm going to use it. And even if I do it, I'm just ticking a box. I don't know how I'm going to come back and actually utilize it within my day-to-day role of doing that. So that probably adds to the element of a challenge for them to figure out how to actually lead individual teams. And like you said, when somebody is super motivated at the beginning, but their work is not going anywhere, they just get bored. And if high performers are not challenged, then they just get bored and they just give up. And they completely turn off. So you really have a detrimental effect to having a high performer who's actually going to be badly underperforming, not because they're a bad employee, just because whatever is happening in the leadership style is just not working.
Yeah. I was smiling because I'm thinking about, like, I wrote some notes and it's interesting, like you said, they're so busy doing the work or micromanaging the work that they're lacking the time to do the important things and get everybody else to do it and fire on all cylinders, if you will. And so their team perform, and then it's that vicious cycle or that downward spiral of I then have to do more work for my team to get, and then I gotta go and the manager, and we've seen that recently, right? Middle managers being probably the, if I remember correctly, was the biggest group in terms of professionals who were burning out. And when you put that next to the statistic that you brought up, that 58% of managers claim to have never received any leadership training, it's kind of obvious that they're burning out. They really aren't skilled to lead in. I mean, the world has changed a lot in the last few years, especially the attitude towards work. They're unskilled or underskilled to get that done, which is a downward spiral that we're seeing play out with more and more burnout. And you said something else, and it kind of maybe I wrote this down because I don't know why, but to me, high performance means certain things. We're going to get to that, but it's a quote from Archolycus. I'm Greek, I should know this better, but And he said, and it's kind of been redone a little bit by James Clear recently, but it's we don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. And James Clear kind of modified it and said we don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems.
Nice.
And so in terms of goals and systems, how do they play into the high performance culture?
It's a really interesting question. Really interesting question too, because when I think we're doing a lot of training side of things, we tend to focus so much on goal setting and making sure that your goals are motivating enough for people to get behind them and work hard to achieve those things. But ultimately, the longevity of it probably comes with the systems that you put in place. So as a leader, you need to figure out how you can balance setting the goals and getting your team on board, and also putting these systems into place so that whether you're there or not, those systems will still keep chugging on, along with the other people who are interested in kind of going for this. I think the whole system side of things is really, really underplayed and underutilized by probably most companies, especially when you're big. It's so hard to put in new systems in place because you already have your ways of doing things. Like I used to joke when I was back as a management consultant. I would say the only reason we have jobs is because there's enough people who say the reason we do it this way is because that's how it's always been done. Like I used to joke about that, but it's so true though. It's like the moment somebody says that, I'm like, there's an opportunity here. So.
Yeah, it is, and it's crazy because I'd heard once, and I can't quote it verbatim, but it was almost like in business, it's almost like being on an escalator that's going the wrong way. So if you're not advancing, you're falling back. So to your point, every time I hear well, that's how we've always done it, or the other one is, oh, we've tried that, it doesn't work, so we just do it this way, right? And every time you're like, you've tried everything that's just been proposed. Yeah, we tried all that, nothing works. It almost feels like there's that, we're on this escalator, but they don't realize that it's actually bringing them backward as business advances. They're being pulled back. Do you think there are any differences in achieving high performance between organizations and individuals?
This is an interesting question. So it probably nicely ties back to what you were saying, well, because this kind of brings in change aspect, right? Like change management in how individuals feel about change. What was something one of my mentors said at one point when we were learning about kind of sales strategies and stuff like that, and how we can kind of position into winning corporate contracts. One of the things they were saying was the difference between the individual one-to-one conversations versus the organization conversation is to understand an individual perspective. You just need to know what the individual wants and how you can deliver that. But for an organization perspective, you need to know what the individual wants, how you can deliver it, and how they can position themselves to be the winner for the organization, for their bosses and powers that be. So there's a hidden thing that we don't know about from the organization side of things. So it's like for the organization to become high performing, there's all these different individuals that need to be high performers, as well as the leaders of the organization looking ahead and kind of having the same attitude. For an individual, right now, I think the individual has the easiest opportunity to become a high performer, like in my opinion, because so many people are quitting. So many people don't want to do any work. People just want to stay at home. So if you just put in like 2 ounces more effort than everybody else, you can probably instantly see as a high performer, especially if you have good communication skills that can articulate the value that you're bringing to the firm. Then, like at least what I've seen when we're working with like managers and even new grads that join, within the first few months, they're making a massive impact that previously would have been really, really difficult to make just because everybody else doesn't care enough to do it. So as an organization to stand out, I think it's probably almost a similar trend in the SME world, like when you have like smaller, medium enterprises. So because they can position themselves a little bit better than other companies and their competitors who are lagging behind because they don't have the skill set, or they don't have the leaders that are looking to drive in the same way as they might. So it's just, I think it's a similar thing, but for an organization, it's like a duality. You need to satisfy your overall goals as well as make sure the individuals are happy within your firm, because then they'll just be working much harder for you. And I think just a Zoom quiz Friday is not enough to bring in that culture.
You've said a few things there that we talked about. Okay, so the individual, let's start with. I don't want to spend too much time on the individual, but it's so important. Like you mentioned, for the individual, it's one person. It's easier. Hopefully, you're in touch with your motivations, your drive, your why, however, your flame, whatever you want to call it. But working in, and this is going to be a little bit more common in a bigger organization, but it happens in small organizations. I've seen it where performance isn't it. It's not all there is. In fact, dealing with, we started by talking about some underskilled managers. Often performance isn't going to be the most important thing. It's going to be things like, do I like this person? Do they make me feel good about being a manager? And that's really hard to navigate if you're going into a workspace. I'm very Cartesian. I'm here for results. I was hired for a reason. I've got goals and mission and so on. I'm that individual. How do you recommend that someone uses that performance to get ahead in an environment where perhaps it's not all there is?
There's two aspects, right? Like you were saying, when you are looking at, and when you are a manager, like, who do you look at? Like, you have 1,001 things on your plate. So someone can be working extremely hard and be the best in your whole team. But if they don't say anything, or if they don't show how their work has impacted the growth of whatever's happening or taking things off your plate, you just don't know.
Right.
So I have a good example of this. In my old work, we were working together, me and this other guy, under the same boss. And my manager was giving a lot of work. Like, he was managing maybe like 16 different teams, and he was trying to lead a whole new program where the whole company did not want this to happen, except for the top level bosses. So there was massive resistance. So you can imagine like this pressure that the manager is under when he's trying to manage all these stakeholders and trying to get all of us to do the job. So for us, it was really difficult to navigate the waters because we didn't have much guidance. So for me, that was fine. Like, I thrived under that environment. So I was like, great, I'm gonna take this, this is what I'm gonna do. And then when we had meetings, I was like, look, this is what I did. Here's what the challenge is, and this is how we met that challenge. And also, this will open up these other problems, so we solved that as well. So now you can go and present this to clients. I'll be happy. Cool, job done. The other guy, however, probably a much better consultant than I was, but he didn't have the same capacity to articulate the job that he was doing, or to articulate how much he was doing. So now, whenever we had these meetings, his manager would then come and give him more work and not me, because I was always clear as to how much work I had to do, what things I was focusing on, and where the strategic opportunities were for me to go on to. Whereas he never did that, so he got way too much work than what he could handle, and he was constantly burning out. And at the end of the day, like, he had to have the conversation with the manager to say, dude, I can't do all this stuff. But all to hear from the manager, why didn't you tell me earlier? Right. Like, so I was constantly having a conversation with this guy as well, because we were good friends, and I was telling him, like, dude, he won't know. Yeah. It's not the manager's fault. He has so many things on his plate. Like, he cannot keep track of what each individual person in all his teams is working on. It's just not possible. So I think when performance is not it, the most important thing that I think anyone can bring to anything is their communication skills and their ability to articulate their value to the firm or to the project or whatever it is. Right. Because at the end of the day, the only people who really get recognized are the ones who are perceived to add the most value. Not necessarily who add the most value, but who are perceived to, right? Like, I'm not necessarily here to say whether it's right or wrong. I'm just here to say this is what it is and how we can position ourselves on the side of the right side.
It's a reality. And having worked, so my background in HR and I worked for a long time in training and development, and I would tell my team, it's about marketing, because we can build the best training program there is, but if we don't market it and really sell that value, training is not, for most managers, seen as the long-term investment that it is. They're not seeing it as a long-term health solution of their team or their organization. They're seeing it as a short-term cost. And so we have to market. And so that's what I'm hearing. What you're saying is your performance or the work that you do, regardless of how that's measured within the organization, it's good. Like, do what you got to do, but you got to market it. And that's going to come with communication. And to a certain extent, it might be even exaggerating certain points and saying like, oh my God, this was so hard. It took you an afternoon, you got it done. But if you know that, all the people around you might have taken a whole weekend to get it done, but you're higher skilled, why not play on that?
Yeah.
You mentioned something earlier about, you kind of alluded to the organization stagnating and getting kind of, they're no longer pursuing a higher ground. They're not pushing harder. How does an organization avoid that?
So I was actually just having this conversation with somebody yesterday. One of the university were doing a talk. So they were saying that they see a lot of their students come in with so much drive, and over time the level of drive dries off. So we'll probably see a similar trend when it comes to organizations, right? But when I think about organizations and their drive, we just think of them as entities, but actually they're led by the leadership team. So if you have a fast-driving leadership team who isn't burnt out themselves, then you can see that they're probably hungry to keep going. But on the other hand, if they are burning out or are already burnt out and they don't really see an opportunity for growth, that's when they start kind of going down. So I think to avoid it, you just need to start identifying some of the signs. And one of the biggest things that I think a lot of people at that level underestimate is that there's still more learning to do. Because I think if you're in a top position in a company, whether it's a small company, medium company, or a large company, you think you're the head honcho, right? You're like, you've got nothing else to do. So at that point, you just think your job as a leadership team becomes managing the rest of the company to drive towards strategic outcomes. But yes, each term on term, you're kind of just setting these outcomes. That's about it. But as an individual or as a team, if you're not learning new ways to lead the company, if you're not learning new ways to grow, new ways to manage, whatever, you're not really competing with the rest of the people who are doing that, right? You're just sort of chugging on with what you know. But if you just keep doing what you know, you'll keep getting results that you've always got. So there's always a level higher.
If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got.
Exactly.
I gave so I did a lunch and learn on Tuesday with a group of tech startups and talking about building a winning team. And in the end, it comes back to, I like to use, I'm wearing this Madrid shirt. I like to use sports analogies a lot because it's very obvious, right? There's so much money behind sports and they've got such a system. They're bringing in new blood. That new blood brings in new talent, new ideas. And they're always trying to improve because their competitors are improving. And the teams with, not a Madrid, but when we're looking at smaller teams with smaller budgets, what they lack in the resources, they're trying to make up with resourcefulness. They're going to try and find the better coach. They're going to identify the strengths they have and build on them. That's where, the best recommendation for HR people who get to the point where they're like, I think I'm going to need to terminate someone is, well, you need to look in the mirror before you do that and ask yourself and really be honest. Have you done everything you can to save this person and set them up for success? And if you can't answer that honestly and truthfully with a yes, it's on you before you get rid of that person.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And actually, it reminds me of this one client that we're working on a little while ago now, but they had just started to kind of formulate a senior leadership team within they basically united a bunch of different verticals into one to kind of figure out how to run this new strategy, which was great. But the problem is each of these vertical leaders, they were leading their own vertical and they were respected within the vertical. But as a leadership team, they had no unity. So, but what does it look like for the employees? For the employees, it looks like they are the SLT, the leadership team. So they are one unit. So whatever the weakest link is, that's what's getting cascaded down. Yeah. But as individuals within that leadership team, you don't perceive it that way. So what we're saying is like, well, if they look at you as a unit, you need to operate as a unit. Because if not, the weakest one of you, not necessarily the weakest performer or something like that, but the one with the worst attitude, let's say, the one with the most stress, that's the thing that's going to cascade down. So if one person appear to be stressed out all the time, which inevitably happens, then the whole organization is stressed out. And then you see the churn rate go up, the burnout rates go up, and all the attitude and the whole kind of energy is just low within the organization. And that's what we did see. So when they start recognizing that that's a problem and how they need to fix it is by operating as a unit and figuring out a unified strategy that they can communicate to each of their teams, and then not just as an individual, but as a whole unit, then suddenly the whole morale lifts up, and people who were previously disengaged are suddenly engaged, just because, it's actually a really interesting point about the whole leadership concept. Sorry, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent.
Go ahead.
But I watched a series recently. I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen this called Physical 100 on Netflix? Have you seen it? Yeah. So, it's basically taking the 100 strongest people in Korea or something, and they come to the competitions to see who the best is. But what I found was really interesting is each of them are at the top of their field. Yeah. Right? So they were all individually motivated to work hard enough to get to the top of their field. So they are self-motivated, self-reliant, and high performers. But what happens is when you saw the team competitions come through, when one was selected as a leader, all of them said, oh wow, because our leader was good, we did well in this round. So even though all of them individually are the top performers, if they had a terrible leader, they didn't do well. And when they had a good leader, they did well. So that just goes to show how much even highest of performers can be massively affected by how good the leader is or how they think. And that kind of blew my mind.
No, that's a great analogy, especially when because I love the show. I was when you consider, and I think it was the last group she's a wrestler, and she felt really she felt kind of, because her teammate, I don't remember he was also a wrestler, challenged her, that she really felt like we had said we weren't going to do it. And even though we're the last team and she kind of got the runts of the litter, she was able to, like you said, they were all individually great, but they were seen as the weakest. But she inspired them and she provided them with that, doesn't matter, we may be seen, and even as as somebody watching the show, it was, oh wow, they're the weakest team because they were the last ones that nobody wanted. Yeah. But you quickly got it when they went into that sandbag, doing the bridge. You quickly saw that she's inspiring the team. They're working together. They're really behind it. Whereas the other one is maybe relying a little too much on the leader and the fact that he's a winner and we're going to win because of it, versus we've got the odds stacked. We've got an enemy that we're going to face. And a lot of the things that we talk about when we say, how do you get a team rallying behind? Well, that's what they had. So I think that the Physical 100 provides a really good, to your point, especially when you look at the team aspect. You say they're all the best in their fields, but look at how they perform differently when led differently. Yeah. And led differently, which is leading to their mental aspects of it.
Exactly right, which is crazy when you think about how organizations would work, because you don't know when you're hiring everybody if they are the top of their field or not, right? Until you work with them, you probably don't know. Right. So you're trying to obviously hire the best that you can, but there's that tendency when you're at the top, you feel like you want to relax. But actually, if you look around, there are people much higher than you, and there's people below you who are just gunning for you. Yeah. So whether you're a top performing company or not, you need to start be on your toes, really, just to kind of figure out that actually leadership is so important, whether you have a high performing team or not. And most often, probably don't have 100% of high performers in your team. No. So if high performers themselves can't be swayed that way, then you need to realize that other people will need probably a lot more sway.
Exactly. No, to your point, I mean, again, going back to the sports analogy, not everybody is going to be a first-line center, right? You're going to have starters, whichever sport you want to go to, you're going to have starters, and then you're going to have people who come in, and that's, you've got to work with that and get the most out of each one. In fact, a lot of times the team with all the stars, there's a lot of ego. There's a lot of reliance on, we're already the best. And that's where those teams fall short of expectations. Let's say, if I'm leading an organization now and I find we're not there, we don't have that mindset, and I want us to get it, how do we get started?
Yeah, this is cool. So I think it all comes with that vision we talked about. That's what everything starts off with. So if you feel like you're not a high-performing team, the basis of that, the foundation will be why should you be AI, right? So if you can figure out a vision that everybody feels like they want to get behind, then that is where you start. Once you've figured that thing out, then the rest becomes a little bit easier. So the attitude, I think, is the hardest thing to possibly teach or to get people. And I remember one of my first ever employers said that to me, and I kind of stuck with it, because I was an engineer, side story, but I was an engineer trying to go into a tax role when I was doing an internship years and years and years ago. And I asked them, I was like, hey, why would you hire me? Because I was in the final stage in partner interview. I was like, why am I here? Like, I'm an engineer. You could hire a finance person and they'd hit the ground running. And they were like, yeah, but the skills are easily taught. That's the last 2%. 98% is the attitude. And that's what I want. And I was like, oh, wow, cool. So when you have these teams that you're trying to lead, you have the vision. Now you got to figure out what skill set that the teams have, not just from a technical point of view, but from an attitude point of view and the soft skills set. Because that will really, that will allow you to kind of analyze all these people to say, okay, cool, like who's the doer, who's the thinker, who's the analyzer, all this kind of stuff, right? And then there's all these tools about personality tests, stuff like that you can also employ if you wanted to kind of find out. But it just gives you a range to see who are you working with. And I think the most important reason to do that is to find what motivates the individual. And the reality is, like, you need to figure out actually what does motivate each person to do something. Have you read this book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah, of course. Great.
Yeah. So, right? Yeah, exactly. So, like, love this tiny book. So anyone who's listening, watching, they haven't read it, you have to do it. It's incredible. But in that, it gives you an analogy as to who you are. Are you the thinker moving forward, all that stuff? And then you can figure out, okay, cool, like we've got this sort of a team. We have this vision. We want to all become high performers. But individually, we need to instill the attitude that they need to be empowered to do stuff. Right? And then as a leader, this is probably the hardest thing. If you're the leader, you've just recognized that you have this sort of team and you are not high performing, you need to make some hard choices, because you need to set individual targets. You need to figure out how you can lead them and empower them to put in their own initiative and bring in their own ideas and actually make them feel heard and recognized. Yeah. And once they do something, you got to recognize them for that thing. Not like a general good job, buddy, but more like a, hey, this thing that you did was amazing. Kind of thing. And then on the back end of all of that, cull the bottom. Right? You've got to do that. But obviously, like you said earlier, you've got to give them the opportunity to match the rest. But if not, you've got to, what do they say, like hire slow, fire fast type thing?
Exactly what I was thinking was hire slow, fire fast. That's not a time aspect, but it is a decision process aspect of somebody's not succeeding, set them up for success, give them the resources, give them the time, go again, have the conversation, communicate, support. But you've got to be expedited when you see that it's not working. Don't let it drag on. A lot of managers won't do a lot of those other steps and then try and fire fast, but you haven't done anything on the front end. So going quickly on the back end can be a huge mistake. Hire slow is not a time thing. You want to go quickly, but take your time and evaluate properly, not evaluate the interview skills, right? Great interviewer, he really impressed me. Well, did he or she impress you because they hired a resume writer and can do interviews well, or did they do that? Did they really have the right attitude, right? Like you said, hire the smile, teach the skill. And it brings back we rise to our goals and we fall to our training. If you've got a right, the continuous improvement process mentality of, we want to get people who are going to go after the goals, have the attitude, or appreciate challenges. They might not have all the skills we want. We're going to give them those. That we can teach. But that attitude of go get them, most cases you have it or you don't. Yeah,
exactly that. And so once they kind of have all these things that fall into place, I think it's just a matter of time. Until that team becomes high performer. Like I said, the continuous improvement thing is the final step. Because once you set all these in motion, you've got to be able to evaluate on a regular basis to see what's working, what's not working, and double down on what is and cut out what isn't. Right. And then that's basically how you become the high-performing team. Yeah. If you instill a well-being aspect in the middle of all that, you'll have a longevity of that high-performing team as well.
I often say, and probably too much, but I say we got to get everybody rowing in the same direction. And it's, you know, if you have the Olympic, I don't know, there's like 6 people rowing. It's not necessarily, obviously they're all going in the same direction, but if their timing is off, you got to have that as a mental picture and saying, well, the person who can't get the timing, we got to get them off. We got to get somebody on. And we got to keep doing that until we get everybody who's got, you know, similar strengths or strengths that complete each other, and they've got that timing and they're rowing in the same direction in order for us to win. And this isn't a, you know, that sounds like a cold corporate kind of, you know, fire people when they don't. No. We got to set them up for success. But when they can't, nobody wants to fail. And so let's not allow people to fail over and over and kind of accept mediocrity. Let's set them up for success. And sometimes setting them up for success is saying, this isn't here. This isn't where you're going to succeed. You've got a lot of talents and skills, but it doesn't fit on this team. And if you're in a big enough organization, sometimes it's a matter of just saying, there's another team that may be better suited for you. But unfortunately, in bigger organizations, often it's a manager unloading what they don't want, not really concerned about what happens on the other team. But when we're looking at SMEs, what are your top recommendations to create a high performance culture?
Yeah, so I think we talked about a few of these already. So I think the first one is to have a really clear vision where they're going, why they're going there. So that has to be like the number one thing that they have to have. And a lot of SMEs don't have it as clearly as probably they could. So that vision, the value proposition, those two things probably go hand in hand. Then hiring based off of values rather than based off technical ability is probably a big thing. Like for me, I've always been a proponent of merit over years of experience. And I don't know what, but I think it's, you know, when people are good at what they do, they are good at what they do. Especially nowadays, you see so many people who are 20 who've been side hustling or running their own business since they were 15. Like they've got 5 years of experience of running their own business successfully, making 6 figures, over somebody who's, you know, 50, has been working in a company since they were 21 and has only ever, you know, reached a certain salary or a certain goal or whatever it is. So you can't judge years of experience with with how good somebody can be.
Yeah, behavior is a function of its own consequence, right? So when you reward time in, you get more time in.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think now it's so much more about value add than time in position. It just makes so much more sense. So yeah, vision, value proposition, then hiring based on values, and then having attitude checks. So make sure everybody has a similar sort of attitude that you want. And I don't mean like you have to have the same sort of thinking and the mindset, but more like you have that, you know, similar to like what the old school Belbin model kind of talks about, like having a correct spread of people that are going to be, you know, hitting all of your weak spots effectively. And then once you have all those things, then you got to make sure that each team or each team member, is feeling empowered enough to put in their own best foot forward. And that means taking initiative within the firm, to doing their own thing, and kind of feeling good enough to come up with their own ideas to the managers, rather than just, okay, you are the leader, you tell me what to do and I will do it. It's like, no, I'm a leader just because I have a leadership position and the drive for it, but really the whole team needs to be gunning towards the victory points that we're looking for. So I think if you have that vision, values, right people for the values, then each person feeling empowered, and finally the right metrics to measure those things, you will actually be a very good position.
Yeah. I really like that you mentioned hiring. That's something that I think, and I have Mary Wassef, who's somebody who's been on this live talk, and she often says, like, hiring is really how you show your culture, and that's not, we're not talking just about high performance, but the culture of the organization, and that's what you're showing. It's that front face, if you will. And I agree that if you want to be high performing, it starts with the people you're bringing on. Like, what is their mentality towards it? I also like the way you said it. I mean, empowering. It's a large basis of having real diversity, not, you know, just face value diversity, but rather, okay, we've got the, you know, a lot of organizations do the check. Okay, we've got visible minorities, we've got so on and so forth. That's all great. But if everybody comes in has to have the same attitude and mentality, you've really minimized the impact of diversity. Everybody's own paradigms are developed from their own experiences and who we are, who we are and our backgrounds and our upbringings and so on will make us have different thinking, and allowing and empowering people to use that to their best ability. It allows that diversity, and that's how we get the most out of our organizations. So I agree with you. I like that, I wrote it down too. I said, it's about your why. You've got to have a vision that inspires or aspires, that you aspire to. And a lot of small organizations, when working with the founders, it goes back to, why are you doing this? Like before we get into the organizational vision, why do you do this? Why do you want to grow? Because if they don't know, forget about creating something for the organization. And then I got a little bit into the what, which is, you've got to have those big, hairy, audacious goals. Whether you use the SMART acronym, I always add it should be achievable but challenging. It's got to be something that's going to push. If you know exactly how you're going to get it done, maybe it's not high enough. You're not shooting high enough. And get them aligned top to bottom. Like, don't just stop at some point. Get people involved. And you can't necessarily just let everybody choose their goals, but we can give options. We can allow people to see, if not the goal itself, how they're going to achieve it. And then the hows. I agree with you. It's about the metrics. What action items are being done? So like, how are you going to get this done? And then how are we going to follow up? And then create accountability mechanisms. So in one organization, they had a habit of jumping over people. So they would say, like, it's faster if I just call the manager directly versus dealing with their supervisor. And that obviously brings problems down the line. So we created kind of, I forget what we called it now, but it's like a swear jar. Whenever somebody jumps over, they've got to put money into the jar, and anybody can call them out. So it eliminates the, oh, you're higher level than me, so I'm not going to say anything. It allows that. It's reminding people of, we don't do this. It's something we've agreed on, and if you do, there's a small little reminder that hurts you. It's $1, so it's not really that expensive.
Yeah.
It does. So I agree with you. And honestly, I'm really happy we've had this conversation, because working on your own, I don't know if you feel this way, but working on my own, often there's am I doing the right thing? Is this the right way to do it? And then having someone as talented as you who's saying the things you're saying, and I'm like, I've got these things written down too. I really appreciate it. It lets me go on in my day really feeling confident. Any last things that you want to add?
That's flattering, Steve. But you got this, and you've inspired me to do so much stuff. And read all your LinkedIn posts. It's always like on point all the time. So
thanks.
It's really good. I'm really happy that we've had this chat, and I think it's been really useful as well. So for ourselves to get things that we're talking about and articulate them in a strategic and kind of pointed way, but also for the people who are listening, hopefully they found some value from this as well.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining the Leadership Live Talk.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Thanks for having me. Have a good one. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and if you did have any questions or thoughts, put it in the comments below. And if you like content like this, then subscribe to this channel. There'll be more where that came from. I'll catch you in the next one.